is the largest town on the east side of the Sierra Nevada in what is today known as the Owens Valley. I would like to acknowledge that the work that I do is about Haya Hunadu, the land of flowing water. It is the ancestral homeland of the Paiute people. They are descendants of the Numu people, the original people of the valley. And I would like to pay my respects to the indigenous communities, past and present, that steward this land and work towards recognition of their rich history and their continuing culture in the region. Thank you. All righty, so words count. Bishop in Tourism Improvement District started in 2015 on a 5-year contract to promote tourism to the area, and it was recently renewed for a further 10 years. It's been a winner of 2 prestigious Poppy Awards from Visit California in 2020, and I've worked with our amazing team right from the beginning, and I'm extremely grateful and humbled to be part of this project, and especially for a destination that I call home, Bishop, California. Although I recently transitioned into van life, and my team leaders are totally supportive of the fact that I can now work even more remotely than I was before. Most of us were working from home even before the pandemic, and that became more common during the pandemic. But we all have a very strong connection to Bishop. We all have a local involvement. We either have lived there for many years and some have grown up there. And so we feel that there is an authenticity to what we do. So, but I am tasked and am going to speak to you about writing for your destination and mostly how I go about writing for our destination. So don't limit your word count. I started out writing blogs and Facebook posts, and I now more commonly write landing pages because my penchant for words was very obvious and that couldn't be curtailed. And I write a lot. So I do a lot of landing pages now. And the thing to do with that is don't limit your word count, but make sure every word counts. And if you have carte blanche to write on a subject, I would encourage you to be brave. And by that, I mean, I was tasked with writing a story that said, hi there. We'll give everybody a minute or so to come in. Yeah. I hope everybody had a good lunch. And I hope I can fulfill some expectations here today. I was tasked with writing a story for our area that said, find 10 weird things about the Eastern Sierra. And I was like, oh, 10 weird things. Weird wasn't in my vocabulary for the Eastern Sierra. It's one of the most photographed destinations in the country. It's beautiful, it's outdoor, it's fantastic. But I say, be brave. Take that subject. Some of us are tasked with writing content for our destinations that we don't choose ourselves because we're part of a bigger campaign. And so I went out there and I talked to my friend Joe, who works in the visitor center, who was a Forest Service ranger. And I went and looked at where I could find various things. And then I decided to add weird and wonderful to this project in the sort of weird kind of wonderful way. And I came up with 10 amazing things, and it subsequently became one of our best read stories. And this was probably near the beginning of our campaign, and it's still being used and people are still reading it. So I'd say be brave, then be passionate. And one of the stories I want to tell you about is fall colors. I think some of you may have destinations where fall colors might be a part of your story, but it may be something else that happens every year or happens often or is a really big feature of what people come to see in your region. And I thought, oh, how do I write about fall colors again this year? And so you have to dig deep into your passion and go, I need to be passionate about this subject, about this place I call home, and go and find something else. And every year I've been able to find something different. I've been able to find a different angle, or I've been able to find more content. And just being really passionate about going out there and I take some photography, which is representative for my stories. But by taking the photography and going out there and looking at it, I go, oh, I never saw that before. So look at it with really fresh eyes and be passionate about your subject, and you can write about it lots of words. And then be generous. Again, that's also the lots of words. I've had this little story that I did, which was just a little auto tour. It's just a little loop around Bishop. It's 62 miles. It's not a big thing, but I created a map. I do some of the graphics as well for my stories. And I created this little map, and it didn't get much traction. And my manager said, wow, that map is amazing. Why don't you do something more with it? So I decided to take that story and build on it. And so be generous with what you're writing and what you're doing, and really give something, not to just your visitor, but to yourself and your local community as to what you're trying to get people to see about your destination. So be really generous with it. I think more is better. I'm the kind of reader that wants to know all about your destination, all about where I'm going to, or all about the subject that I'm interested in, that I'm researching. And I want to know it from the source. I do like reviews. I do like to see what other people say, but I want to know what you want to tell me about your destination or your product or your service. And so I like to be able to look at a website and say, that's interesting. How do I follow that? And then when I can't follow it, I'm disappointed. So I really want to be able to encourage you to follow what you're writing about in order to create more, and give that to someone who really wants more. But so many of your guests will want comprehensive information, and that's me, but others might just be looking for specific experience or a quick overview of possible experiences. They might feel overwhelmed with a lot of content. So it's really important to tell your story so that your key points will pop out and the details will inspire. So think about how to package your story. It doesn't mean limiting your story, it means packaging your story. And then tell your story with keywords, phrases, sentences. Seems super obvious. That's what we do, but sometimes we don't think about those specifically and with intent. So some of our keywords are hiking, cycling, fishing, climbing. That's what we have a lot to offer in our community. Yours might be different, but then your phrases might continue on to be year-round fishing, incredibly dark, clear skies. So think about how to take the word, make a phrase, and then produce a sentence. California's most concentrated sport climbing area. So these are things that the others in your marketing team are going to be able to say, that word's going to work in this brochure, or that's going to work on my Facebook post, or this is going to work here, so that you get some kind of seamless interaction with your words in a bigger website or on a landing page, as well as in other parts of your team's marketing content that they're sending out. So it's really important to make your key points obvious and reusable. And then build your story. Build your story with definitive paragraphs, chapters, and pages. So it's really a no-brainer. That's how we write. We think about our words, we think about our sentences, we think about our paragraphs, but then also to think about how you, again, as I said, package those. So all of those would incorporate your keywords, phrases, and sentences. And as I said, I initially wrote Facebook pages and blogs. And this is just one of the small paragraphs where as I wrote it, I bring in the key phrases, and I've underlined those here, like year-round mountain biking or topographically diverse. And these are things that we can bring out in other parts of our marketing and our campaigns. And trails and tracks that seem almost endless. They're just, some of them can be evocative and some of them can just be very specifically, this is it. And this also, one of the things that when you write is also think about your visual layout. If you're writing, I have the opportunity to build the pages that I write on. So I also look at my writing and think about what is this going to look like? And how is a user going to interact with this on the page? So sometimes I use toggles, sometimes you use buttons, but I put things on the page so that I am unsure as to how to open the link that's in the photograph. So, oh, I don't see it. That's it. That's part of the problem. Okay, so for instance, the mountain biking in the Eastern Sierra, there's an introductory paragraph with certain keywords, and then we scroll down onto the page a little bit, and we see, yeah, you can continue on. I've got the toggles, and those open up into more information. So someone like me goes, oh, good, something more. I can open that up, and someone else goes, oh, too much, scroll on. And it answers the question for everybody. It tells everybody's going to get something out of it and hopefully be able to go, oh, you know what? There was something else on that page. I should go back and have a look at that. So it encourages people to look at your content thoroughly or as quickly as they want to or they need to at the time. Thank you. And what it also does is allow you to create consistency. So you would have seen on that page there, every good story and every landing page has almost all of these in any order. What, when, where, who, why, and how. And your story will determine the order and connection. Sometimes your what, when, where is, what is this place? Where is it? How did it come to be? It's all about your destination or what you're trying to showcase. Sometimes it's about your traveler. Who am I the right person to go and see this thing? Is this what I would enjoy? How do I get there? It is sometimes about your traveler or your guest as opposed to what you're showing. And sometimes it's both. So think about how you approach those words, the what, when, where, how, who, why, in whichever order, and answer those questions, both for yourself, for your traveler, and in any order that you think or in any manner that you believe is correct for what you're trying to get across. All righty. So this is the biggest one. Research is key. Everything that you write about, research it. We all do this. We think, oh, I know that. I've been there, I've done that. But then when you start looking into your research, you realize that you don't know everything about it. So go experience it. If it's an experience you can do, go and tackle it, do it, try it, be part of it. Talk to the experts. Really importantly, talk to the experts and get their feedback, their knowledge, their information, and you get a better understanding of what it is you're writing about. Look it up. I use Wikipedia. I love Wikipedia. It answers so many questions, and I save pages and I look at it. But then I also go on to, I will follow other pages and look at other information that I will find on what it is I'm writing about, get the facts. These things lead me to other pages, other books, other resources, other experts. Follow your leads. Really follow your leads. I like to think of myself not as a content developer, but as an investigative reporter. So you're really looking at your subject saying, how much information can I find about this? It's not going to be that you're going to put all that information into your story. You may hold some of it back. It may not be relevant. Save some of that information for something that might be relevant later on. But go as far as you can go in order to extract the information. I've often started with a story and I think, okay, I've got everything, and I start to write and I start on a sentence or I start on a tack that I'm thinking of and I go, oh, I want to know how big that thing is. And I've never found that. I never looked it up. And I will sometimes go to the nth degree to go and find that statistic. How big is it? Or whatever the subject is. Really do your research and make sure that you find everything that you can about it. And then, because I think of myself as an investigative reporter, there are some journalism guidelines. And these are just a few of a larger set of journalistic guidelines. So take responsibility for the accuracy of your work. Really make sure that you have put in the time and the energy to look up everything that is important to what you're writing about and that it's accurate. And I have had one time where, and I will go back and correct stuff when I think I've done my research and done it right, and I haven't. And I've had a time where someone came and corrected me, I think on a Facebook post, because we also promote our stories and our landing pages through the various social media. And someone wrote, said, that's not right, it's this, and this person was an expert in the field. And it's great to get that kind of information, but it's also kind of a little soul destroying. You're like, oh, I really tried to do the right thing. So make sure that you really know look at your content and your research, but don't be afraid to go out there and put it out there, and then be prepared to go, oh, cool, I learned something, and change it and fix it. So neither speed nor format excuses inaccuracy. These are actually very specifically pulled from a list of journalistic guidelines, and I think they're really important. So take your time to write, and also by formatting, speed nor format. Format often in this case, what we're doing is about word count, which is what we're talking about. So make sure you have enough space to get what you're writing about accurate. And provide context where applicable. Context is often very necessary in news reporting and journalism because it's timely or very specific to something. But sometimes when what we're writing about, context is important to set the scene or offer a certain perspective of what you're trying to do, because context can change how we view things. And if you are trying to get a particular story across, or you're trying to encourage someone to go to a destination, to a particular venue in your destination or an area to look at something, context can change how that person views that thing that you're writing about. So think about the context in what you're doing. And then, as I said before, gather, update, and correct information throughout the life of your content, if you can. Sometimes that's a little bit difficult. I don't go back. Sometimes I go back to the very beginning, 4 or 5 years, but there are other times I don't. There are pages, for example, where we have, for instance, restaurants, and especially since in the pandemic, restaurants that closed and businesses that closed. I've gone back, and I often find myself in the process of going back and going, oh, that story doesn't work anymore, but we still have readers and people who are visiting our site clicking on that story, and it's not, and the content isn't correct. So it's really important where your story still has legs and is viable to go and correct the content of that story. And then be cautious when making promises. I think we heard something earlier today, and I don't remember exactly the words, but make sure that you know what you're promising, because you know what your DMO can offer and what your team offers, and make sure that those promises will be kept. They aren't necessarily great, big, huge promises, but for instance, a marketing offer, make sure that that's still viable and that whoever is going to be interested in it will still be able to utilize that offer. And then really important, identify sources, and very clearly when necessary. If you're quoting verbatim, really quote and give the name of the person who made the quote. If you're paraphrasing, I love hyperlinks, and I put lots of hyperlinks in my content because it's the easiest way to to identify a source, and it also improves SEO on both sides. So that's very important there. We don't need to go through to that one, thank you. So beware of repetition. Keep your thesaurus handy and find the perfect word for every instance. Marketing copy, repetition is really good for marketing copy and for ad copy, that it works in that instance. But when you're telling a story, it can sometimes make it boring. It's the same word. We keep hearing the same word. And in that instance, it isn't always uplifting or inspiring or interesting. So try to avoid repetition. Redundancy. Okay, I'm talking about word count. And so you think, okay, well, why don't we just write a lot about all sorts of stuff? Redundancy is also another thing that's really important to try to limit or even reduce as much as you can. Stick to your subject and elaborate where it's relevant and interesting. And one of the places where you can improve that or work on that is to cross-sell other pages, other businesses, places where that may not appear redundant, but it is offering something a little bit more to your destination. So resist the urge to include information that is superfluous, which is a little different. So you can still offer information that is relevant. And verbosity. Avoid wordiness. Again, we're talking about word count. So how can you avoid wordiness? One of the best ways to avoid wordiness is to shorten your sentences. Once you've read through, look at your sentence and say, and we have so many apps and so much technology that can help us to improve our grammar. And grammar is great when you are thinking about it in the strict sense of the word, but you also might want to be a little poetic and have prose that is, what's the word? Enticing and intriguing, but you still don't want to be verbose. So be really careful with how you balance being poetic and producing something that is intriguing, but without being massively wordy. So look at your sentences. I find one of my main ones that I do a lot, and I have to think about it all, is I write a long sentence with an and then I realize I don't need that and. I can take that and out, put in a full stop, take out a couple of words, and immediately those two phrases become much more powerful, or those two sentences become much more powerful by themselves than they did in that one long sentence. And then invite everyone. So diversity and equity, it's really important. We heard this earlier. Demonstrate your destination's commitment to diversity and equity with language that shows you understand that the divergent characteristics and the differing wants and needs of your potential guests. So say things, for instance, don't use things like, we're proud champions of diversity, or we welcome everybody is a great phrase, but it still needs a little more clarification. We speak Spanish is another way to show that you have diversity. Just be yourself. Things that encourage people to say, oh, I don't have to show up and be someone else. Oh yes, Muna said that today. It's like, there's room for you and me. Fishing is for everyone. That's a big one in our part of the world. So that's one of the reasons I included. And then things like perhaps all women's adventure weekend. We're encouraging women to come and be adventurous with us. There are lots of ways to use phraseology that can demonstrate your commitment to these. And inclusion and belonging. I would say that some of the biggest things are to avoid potentially negative words like only or limited or restricted. Qualify them if they're necessary. For example, it's time restricted, or the weather, or there's a reasonable rationale why you would use those words, but try to avoid those words if possible, and use positive words like open, best suited, ally, unreserved, welcoming, liberating. So think about your word choice there that might resonate negatively with someone when you know what you meant. We always know what we mean. So it's really important to know that you are thinking about what someone else might see or think of when they read your words. And create advocates through sustainability. So sustainability, I feel, is the education is key to sustainability, and it's really about how people behave. Teach your guests what behavior gives them the best experience, and then they'll return and inspire others. And I heard something earlier this morning as well. Well-behaved guests are great, but that doesn't mean they always had a good experience. We want guests to behave the way we want them to in our space. And that's sustainable because they'll come there and they'll go, I didn't know I could do this. Yes, I had a great time. And they'll go back and tell someone else, and they'll bring someone else. Therefore, your product is then sustainable because people are behaving in it the way you want them to behave in it. And so your sustainability is balancing and protecting your supply and your demand. You're supplying something, people are demanding it. If they don't behave appropriately, your supply is not going to be lasting. If your supply doesn't give them the opportunity to behave so that they get a great experience, your demand is not going to be lasting. And that is sustainability in a DMO. And then your locals. Reassure your local audience that more visitors means more opportunity to create more qualified advocates, people who behave in your space the way you would like them to behave. Think of it as your own home. We all have different ways. You please take your shoes off when you come in the door. Someone else says, come in, bring it in. The dogs come in, they get on the couch, doesn't matter. We want people to behave in our space the way we behave in our space. And then keep some local secrets secret and make sure that your locals do know about it. It's really important. Some people will find them, and that's great. And when they do find them, hopefully they will be behaving in those spaces the way you want them to behave in those spaces. But keep them secret and let your locals participate in that knowledge that there are things that locals do, and it isn't always come and do this because this is what the locals do. That's great, but it also can be detrimental to your community. So balance that carefully. And then more is more. Isn't that delicious? Make it more-ish. I want more. Give me more. You know what it's like. You pick at that one and you go, well, I'll have another one and then have another. And the next thing you know, you're eating the whole thing. So provide as much information as you can. Present the meal. Let the person eat as much as they would like. And package it well. Present it to each reader so they find a morsel or a meal to satisfy them. And then craft it so your team can extract portions and bites for use across the digital and print spectrum. So make it shareable. It's like food. This is the other big key: proofread, 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 proofread. Put your work into different formats: Word doc, plain text, web page. Simply change the font and size, but always proofread. And I often go back and read my stuff after the fact as well and look at it again, or I go back and look at a page when I'm building something else or writing something else and go, oh my gosh, how did I not see that? And I go and fix it. So be ready to read your work over and over again. And better still, have someone else proofread it. I do not have the luxury of having too many people available to proofread my work. So I sit there and I actually run my finger across it like this. And I try to see every single word. So it takes a bit of time, but really make a very concerted effort to proofread your work. And then keep your content updated. Update your Word documents to reflect what's on your website. Because I've run into that once before where I've seen something when I'm working and I go and fix it and I don't change it in the Word document. And then I go back sometime later to write a different story and I go, oh, that paragraph would work. And I pull it in there and I adjust it. And then I go back, oh, I changed this once upon a time. And then you have, so keep your content as updated as you possibly can based on what's on the website or in other content where possible. It is a little tricky. And then add new information when it comes to hand. So statistics change. Things change. As I said, things like restaurants closing in your DMO. So make sure that those are not still in your content. And if you need to work with somebody on your team to make sure that that is changed, then make sure you work with someone who does that. And then review your documents often for content that can be reused or incorporated into new stories. Because that's also where your thread comes in, where your keywords, your phrases, your sentences, you're pulling those through. And you don't always want to even quote yourself verbatim. So perhaps repackage a sentence or a paragraph. And then I would say the key takeaways to producing really good long form content is be courageous. Go out there and climb that mountain. Do your research, structure your content, proofread, and revisit. Those are just the things to follow every time you write something. And then one of the things that I was introduced to by a colleague of mine is the works of Dr. Cialdini. I'm not sure if any of you know him, but he's written some very interesting books. On the one that I've read is The 7 Principles of Persuasion. And these are about how to prepare a reader or an audience to say yes to something that you're offering. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're offering something and we want someone to go, yes, I want to go there. So I'm not qualified or authorized to speak on his work, but I really like the principles and I've looked at them, I've read it, I've tried really hard to incorporate those principles. I do them quite specifically and with intent in my introductions on the landing page copy that I write, but I also think about it if I write copy that is a little bit more narrative as well, that you can use these principles. So these are the books, the 2 books that I would encourage you to look at is Persuasion and Influence. And the website is influenceatwork.com. And it's really eye-opening when you start to read it. It's not very complicated at all. It's really good information, and the way he describes how to use it is easy to extract and easy to look at your own sentences and go, oh yeah, if I just did that, this would be that, and structure your paragraphs that way. And then I would like to say thank you. I'd like to say thank you to CrowdRiff. CrowdRiff has transformed my ability to tell stories. And you'd think, really? It's photography. You're doing words. I will say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I take that literally. So I will look at photography. I will go and find photography because I've written these words and I want someone to read that, but I would like to have the visual representation of it. And I would often take my own photography. We're very fortunate to have access to really good photographers in our area, but sometimes it's not just the one I want. And so I can find that often on CrowdRiff. And when I can't, well, I would go out and encourage someone to try and find it, do something, find a shot for me. But it really has made a difference to me is to use CrowdRiff for my photography. And I would say thank you to all of you for attending and listening. And I would encourage you to come visit Bishop. We are the small town with a big backyard. Thank you. Uh, 1 minute and 12 seconds. I don't know if there are any questions or anybody had any.
What usually comes first? Is it subject or?
That's a really good question. I think because of the fact that I'm driven by a team that has objectives that we do that are seasonal or throughout the year, it's the subject. But I go out and I was just chatting to someone earlier saying, how many of us have lived somewhere and then after we've left, we go, oh, I should have done that thing. I used to live there and I never did that thing. So I made a really concerted effort to go and do stuff in Bishop, not because you have to, but just because you can't not. It's amazing. So I go out and do those things. But as far as my writing is concerned, a lot of it is driven by here's what we're focusing on. Here's what we're trying to get people to understand about our destination. And then I find things, I'm like, can I write about this, please? And they're like, okay. So I'm like, yay. Yeah. And there are always subjects. There are always subjects. They're all swimming in my head all the time. Yes.
The post that you recommended is like
What other books would you recommend for someone who's interested in being a better storyteller?
I think just reading. I would have to honestly say, simply just reading. One of the things I did, you can probably hear from my accent that I'm not a native Californian. I'm originally from South Africa, born and raised. But I've spent many, many years in the US. My mom was American, and I've spent at least 20 years in California. But one of the things I did was I asked friends about, can you recommend books for me about California and California history? I'm really interested in history. I think history is a really important part of it is. It's an important part of what shapes our future. And I think that's very clear if you see what's happening in the US today in terms of books and reading, that history is very important. And historical books and books about real people, I prefer, and a good novel is a great book, but books about real people will spark what you think you want to learn about a subject or a place, and will give you more context on that. I just like reading about places and people, and I like meeting places and people, which is why I've decided to do van life.